And good morning. Welcome to I Need Coffee. This is a Saturday morning edition. And on my last video, I received an interesting question from, let me try to find it, from Karsten Hansen. And it was seemed like, well, what about this? And I had never really thought about it before, but in the last video, I talked about removing Docker containers and images and clearing them out if they were no longer needed. And he asked, well, what about the disk space that's freed up? How much did that really free up? And did you check for that is what I took from his question. And I just kind of never thought about it. And I think it's an interesting topic because I have wondered where Docker stores its stuff and how much space does it actually consume. So let's take a quick look at that. I think I found some interesting results based on a quick search that I did, and I'll show you the tools that I use to do that. So if I can figure this out. This is a tool that I have been using forever, many years. It's open. I don't know if it's open source, but it is free and you can download it. But it is so old that it doesn't install properly on current versions of Windows. And if you do download it and install it, you will need to use the Windows compatibility mode to disable the version checker of the installer in order to get it to work. But once I get past that version check, it has run fine on every single machine I've used it on in the last several years. So Winterstat, it's a Windows version of, I guess like a KDE or a Linux utility, and it's fantastic. It scans all of your drives, shows you which files are using, which directories are using the most space on each drive. You can then drill down and see which files are using the most space. And it has this amazing graphical representation of your files. So super cool utility, and I'll show you what that looks like. And this is what I found. I'll come back to this, but it's really only a couple directories that seem to consume space, but they do pile up. So it is quite a bit of disk space that is used. So let me switch over to my Docker server here. So this is running. Okay, so I had a new container that got built. Great. So if you look at this, let me just minimize this to avoid distraction. If you look at this list of Docker images, it says that these Docker images use a certain amount of disk. And so you see dev1 uses 15.2 gigs, test11 uses 15.2, test1, etc. So each of these named images based on the BC sandbox uses, it's saying, roughly 15.2 gigs. Then below that, we have the generic OS images that are used by BC Container Helper, and those are estimated to use 10.1 gigabytes. So I was assuming, okay, 15.2 gigs. So if I delete one of those images, it frees up 15 gigs, right? Well, let's see. I don't actually know. So what I did is I started by running Winterstat. And when you first launch it, and it'll prompt you, do you want it to scan all drives, specific drives? I just had it scan all drives. In this case, I have two drives, a C drive and a D drive. Now, I have Docker configured to, although it is installed on the C drive, I have it configured to store its data files on D drive. And to do that, you will open up the directory, and let me just find where that is because I configure it once and then never remember. So that is located on C, program data, Docker, and then within the Docker directory, there is a subdirectory called config, and you will need to, at least I'm using Docker Enterprise. I don't know if desktop has the exact same configuration file. I think you can configure Docker Desktop through the UI and paste in these options. But I created a file called daemon.json, and there is a configuration parameter formerly called graph, G-R-A-P-H, but apparently that's deprecated. The new parameter or new setting is called data-root. And in that, for that parameter, I specified that I want my Docker files stored in D Docker, so on the D drive, since I have a separate data drive. So that's where most of my Docker files should be stored. Okay. So with that, what I can see is that on my C drive, there is approximately 78 gigs of data stored there. And then on my D drive, I have about 68 gigs of data. So let's see what that looks like. So if I expand my D, it sorts it based on the directory that uses the most space on disk. And in this case, we see bcartifacts.cache on top. Very interesting. I never looked at what bcartifacts.cache is. I'm assuming that that started to be used with the newer version of Nav Container Helper that uses artifacts or image artifacts. So if I expand this, there's a folder called Sandbox, and within that folder, we have a directory for each version of BC that is used. So all of the artifacts that are used for every single version appear to be stored here. Now, let me find the latest version. It looks like it is 15.509. So 16.4, no, 15.542. And if I right click on here, I can say Explore here. Now, if I look at that, we see platform and then US. And this seems to correspond with the zip files that are downloaded during the named image build process, which is kind of cool. Actually, my head's in the way, so let me scoot that over. So let's go into platform, and you see this looks like the contents of the platform zip file that are downloaded when you do a Docker container or a named image build. We have applications, test framework, base app, we have configuration packages, we have service tier, and if I go up to the US folder, we have applications.us configuration packages extension, and then we have the business central-us.back file, which I'm assuming is the SQL Server back file. We have a Cronus FLF, so pretty cool. Now, that's great, we can see that. The downside to that is we have quite a few of those. So every single version from 16.3 that I have apparently downloaded for the named images when using the artifacts, I still have all those folders. So that means that in my Sandbox folder, I have 36 gigs of artifacts that are sitting around, and I'm pretty sure I don't need those anymore because currently I've cleaned all my containers, removed all my images, and right now I only have the 15.509, 15.542. I only am using 2 of those artifacts. Now, you could say, well, what if you want to create a named image based on 16.3, 14.085, blah, blah, blah. Sure, you could keep those around, but in my case, I'm pretty sure I won't be doing that. So it looks like I could probably get rid of quite a bit of these files here. So roughly 32 gigs of files. That's kind of, that's not a small amount of data that I could clear out. So let me just do that, see what happens. So I'm just going to hit delete. Now, you can also delete things through this Winterstat interface, but I'll just go through the File Explorer interface. So that's the primary one on my C drive. And the latest version of BC Container Helper, the new version of that, does have that JSON configuration file. And I'm guessing that one of the 2 parameters in there for the file locations might allow you to specify where the directory where those artifacts are stored. I haven't tried to use that configuration file yet, but it would be interesting to know if that is one of the two options where I can tell it to store. Okay, preparing to recycle. So we'll see if this works, or I'll see if something is locking those files. Yeah, it doesn't look like it's doing anything. Okay, so I might not be able to delete those quite yet without, stopping Docker. So the rest of this is pretty typical Windows stuff. If I go into C program data, there is the BC container helper. Oh, okay, so this is saying that these 20 items are too big to recycle. Great, let's ditch them. I did, under program data, I believe I did have nav container helper with a ton of stuff in there. I deleted that because in the last video I removed nav container helper and installed BC container helper. And within BC container helper, I have an extension for each of my containers. So now if I do docker ps, I have a container called dev and I have a container called test1. I'm not quite sure what happened to test PSA. Okay, so that's interesting, but let me close this and close this. Go back here. So I do have a dev and a test, or dev and a test1. So I know what those are. Those are the extensions apparently for those containers. Test1 appears to be orphaned. So there's a little bit there, but it's for 200 megs, so not a big deal there. The rest of this stuff is just my stuff, nothing related to Docker. Now on my D drive, let's take a look at that. Here's my D Docker folder that I created in order, that's where I told Docker to store its stuff, and I have 61 gigs there. And this is looking a lot more like this, right? So here I have supposedly 4 images of 15 gigs each. So let's see what we have here. So now within that, there is a folder called Windows Filter that is the primary usage of that folder. So let's expand that, and aha, look at that. Now, these are these crazy long, GUID-like values, so I can't tell what these are. So let's run this command. I found this on a, sorry, I was doing some other research. Okay, let me pull up that blog post where I found this. Come on. Okay, let me find this URL. So there is a command that you can use to determine, wow, why can't I find it? Okay, one moment. Karsten actually found the same blog post that I did. Playlist, comments, here we go. And he sent this to me. Okay, there it is. So let me just pull this up. And pull it up over here. So this is a person, the Lonely Administrator blog, JD Hicks, I think is his name. And he has an interesting command that allows you to see these really long IDs for the containers. Now, actually, it looks like it is containers. I thought it was images, but let's give this a try. So yeah, it looks like it is containers. And so we have the 0EAC FE130. And so if I navigate to this Windows filter and I filter based on this name, there's my FE130, and I can also see the 0EAC. So the 0EAC is my dev container. So let's go into there. and that is a VHDX sandbox. Very interesting. So a virtual hard drive image being used by the Docker container. So I haven't really poked around here. This is the first time I've gone to this level to see this. So it's basically a virtual hard drive running under the context of Docker as a container. Interesting. And then if I look at that, that's 1.8 gigs. So that's not very big. 1.75 if you include all the other related files. And then we have the FE1. And that one is 1.75. So the newer containers appear to be smaller, running off of the named image is what it seems like. Because if I go back to Winterstat here, this one is 6.1 gigs. So if I go to Explore here, this says blank and blank base. Now, we have a file subdirectory. So you can see the directory structure has changed, or the subdirectory structure. So we have all of these files, and we have a Hive, and we have utility VM. And so I'm assuming that Freddie had changed the container structure over time to go from this structure to the current structure where we have a relatively clean, just a VHDX. So that's kind of nice. So now I'm wondering, okay, well, I only have 2 containers running, 0 EAC, FE13. So can I delete everything but those? Let's see if I can break something. Okay, so I'm going to hit delete. And why would I want to do this? Well, it's because it's consuming 61 gigs on my disk, but I'm really only using, maybe 4 gigs actively for my containers. Now, that's just my containers. I don't know if this contains image-related files. So let's see what happens. It's kind of nice. This is my dedicated test Docker machine. So if I blow something up, not a big deal. I can always delete it. So here we are deleting quite a bit of stuff. So, yep. So let me just empty my recycle bin while I'm at it. And so what I'm learning here is, yes, Docker and BC container helper do combined use quite a bit of disk space, but it won't be very visible to you. And in my case, for whatever reason, maybe it's something I did wrong, I didn't clean up containers and images properly, but I have a lot of orphan data, it looks like, a lot of orphan files and directories sitting out there consuming collectively. Docker is using 61 gigs, BC Artifacts is using, so we're talking over 90 gigs of space used by this. And if I don't maintain it, I'm sure it'll just pile up. So I'm just deleting these. Let's see if that works. Wow, it keeps asking me. Okay. Oh, try again. Okay, let's see what happens. So it looks like it is working. I thought it was getting blocked, but it's just a permission thing. Wow. Access denied. Okay. Apologize. My family is occupying the nearby kitchen, so you may hear the fun family activities over there and dishes clanging. Okay, wow, there's quite a few though. So I selected 58, so I assume I'm going to have to do this 50 sometimes. I'll probably just skip the rest just so we can move on. Okay, so I'm just going to skip these. Let's see what happens. Looks like it's trying to delete them. Okay. And as you're cleaning this up, let me just do a cancel. Okay, so moving on. Looks like it didn't actually delete those because I just went ahead and canceled it. But once you're done cleaning things up, you can refresh Winterstat. You can refresh at the directory level, the drive level, or the entire computer. And it does this little Pac-Man scan. And it'll rescan your drives and let you know where the data, where your files are that are being stored. And so I'm going to let this finish. And there might be a way to, interrogate these Docker containers. I think Waldo sent me a command where you can see all the container information, but I can never remember them unless I do a lot of them. And it may show you where all the files are stored and how much actual space it consumes. But this is kind of a nice tool to see at the machine level, where are all the files, and you can drill down and figure that out from a high level perspective. So I'll probably go through and clean up this Docker Windows filter folder. But yeah, that's basically what I was looking at. So let me switch back to this. So as we saw, the first folder that I saw was BC artifacts.cache sandbox, and that was roughly 1.6 gigs per BC version. So every single minor build, minor release, I had about 1.6 gigabytes that was just sitting out there. And it looks like that is orphaned, even when I remove those images. Now, maybe I didn't use the proper remove BC image command, and that was before I knew that, and I was deleting the containers and images manually through Docker. Maybe that's why those are orphaned. I'll have to do a test. Then we saw on my D drive, because I use that daemon.json config file to save Docker files on ddocker, and so under Windows filter, we had 1.7 gigs to 6 gigs per container. Looks like the newer artifact-based containers are only 1.7 gigs for those artifact files, but the older ones some of them were up to 6 gigs. Then there are some files in C program data BC container helper, but that looks like that's only about 100 megabits per image, and I think those are app extensions or something like that. So that's not too big of a deal, but over time, I suspect those will build up. So anyway, that's a rundown on disk usage for BC Container Helper and BC Docker containers. Hope you found that helpful, and there we go. Have a great weekend.
Good morning, sun.